All right, so we're back recording again for part two. Hopefully this lets me. There we go. All right. Okay, so on a couple of these chapters, I like to incorporate not just the report writing aspect that comes from the standard report writing book, but how this kind of crosses over into the criminal investigation side. So, kind of a quick little lecture on writing effective reports because that's what we're getting into now. This will be our first week where we're going to write a little narrative report. So let's take a quick look on kind of on the investigative side, and some of this you'll start to see kind of cross over. Um, so your chances of being promoted are good if you can write effective reports. And yes, this is really horrible. The English is bad, the spelling is horrible, but again, just to stress to you the importance of accuracy, spelling, and how you write things, and the ability to capture the essential elements. And report writing really is how you do it. So I'm going to take some pieces from this particular lecture. And when you talk about the importance of reports, Orlando Wilson, Roy McLaren wrote this book, Police Administration, like 40 years ago. It's super old, but their words still ring true today as they did way back then. And they said almost everything that a police officer does has to be reduced to writing. And that is really true, especially now. And what is written is often the determining factor in whether a suspect is arrested in the first place, and if arrested, whether he or she is convicted and sentenced. So your report writing has a lot to do with all of this, not just, taking somebody into custody. And the contents of written reports, in fact, often have a great bearing in life and death situations. To say that officers need to be proficient in report writing really is an understatement. And again, talking about those people that not just view your reports, but where your report can end up. It could be in a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. Your traffic accident report could end up in there. It could be a fatality. It could be a use of force. There are so many different things that come into play, and this is kind of why we're highlighting the importance of reports. And effective reports, those that are good, need to be proficient. Considerable amount of officers' time is spent report writing. If you don't know, it's not like TV. Like I've said before, you spend a lot of time writing reports, more than you probably want to. And poor reporting is going to jeopardize criminal prosecution, etc. And we've already talked about this, but considering what your report's going to be used for, investigative reports weren't required for efficient law enforcement. You wouldn't have to write any. So if you didn't have to investigate and arrest people, etc., you wouldn't have to take reports. But since we do, we have to write these reports, and that's why they need to be effective. Consider some of the examples that I'm going to kind of show you here. The weapon was found in the bushes where the suspect had thrown it. Now, that statement in itself is, it's okay. It kind of makes sense. But here the officer didn't clarify the statement anywhere else in the report. The prosecuting attorney, is going to subpoena the officer, right, to testify at the preliminary hearing. And the problem with this entire statement is it turns out that the officer's partner saw the action and found the gun. So again, what you say and how you say it. The weapon was found in the bushes where the suspect had thrown it. That's great, but who observed this? Who found it? It turns out it was the partner officer. You can't just assume that everybody's going to understand what you write unless you actually write it correctly. And This is just kind of a screenshot to show you kind of how a case moves through the system. All right. And we're not going to take the time to go through it. But, you talk about taking the report and where it's going to end up. It's going to go through this entire process. Okay. Remember that reports are permanent records of all important facts. They're kind of a stockpile of information to be drawn on by, all individuals on the law enforcement team, and even corrections, the courts, etc. Remember that there's technology now. So if you haven't been in a police car lately in the front seat, most officers type their reports now, or some of them dictate their reports, and I'll explain what that is in a few minutes. But nowadays you can pull this keyboard off. It's Velcroed on. You can put it in your lap, and you can actually type a report on the computer in your car. So it's not like the olden days when I started, where you would just handwrite every single thing. Here's kind of a closer look. It's almost like this is your office, really, when it comes down to it. You can do everything. You can actually transmit this report. If you complete it in the car, you can send it into records or your supervisor to approve it, etc., electronically. You don't even have to have paper anymore unless you're going to print the report out. So this is kind of where we're at right now. So what are some of the uses? Again, we're talking a little more on the investigative side, but uses of reports, well, by the prosecuting attorney in preparing the case, by the responding officer when testifying, because chances are you may have to testify, by the judge in determining facts, by the jury if there's a trial. It could be read by many different people for a lot of different reasons. Reports are used to examine the past, provide a document, record of incidents, keep police officers informed, continue investigations, prepare for court, provide the court with facts, refresh a witness's memory, all of these things. So there's a variety of uses for your report. A lot of times they're used to plan for future law enforcement activities, identify hotspots in crime, compile statistics, even to evaluate officer and department performance. And if you don't know this, what do you think? I'll give you, there are really two reasons, or the top two reasons, why officers don't pass their probationary period in policing. Does anybody want to venture a guess on what those two reasons are? Typically two.
I was going to say ineffective report writing.
That's one. That is definitely one. And the other one might be a little hard to figure out, but it's off-duty conduct. So off-duty conduct is one, and failure to be able to write a report proficiently is number two. So it really, really is important that you understand the overall importance of, police reports. We already know from, the other lecture about who might read your report. So again, it could be other officers for investigative purposes. They might be working a similar case, etc. Supervisors, attorneys and judges, jurors, sometimes social workers, city officials. I mean, a lot of times insurance companies, all of these individuals might get a hold of your report. Civil rights groups, citizens, the media, sometimes they get a hold of your stuff. And keep in mind that, again, people come from different backgrounds and fields who have varying degrees of, familiarity with legal terms. And we've already kind of covered police jargon. So we want to kind of stay away from using police jargon. So, if we're talking about problems with reports, writing effective reports is a skill, again, that has to be learned and practiced, just like any other skill in law enforcement. So if you don't write well, don't panic. You can learn, okay, just like we do anything else. Your training officer, when you first get into policing, may encourage recruits to, sometimes take some shortcuts, but I'm going to tell you, don't do that. Over time, With thorough and accurate complex reports, you're going to be able to become a skilled report writer. And hopefully by the end of this class, you will as well. So, understand that effective report writing skills may not be recognized as super important, but they really are, because it's not all going out and catching the bad guy, okay? But here are some problems with reports. So what we tend to see on the investigative side: confusing or unclear sentences, meaning it's not kind of a complete sentence; assumptions, conclusions, and opinions; extreme wordiness, and too many abbreviations and the use of jargon, which we talked about in our previous lecture; missing or incomplete information. The number one issue is misspelled words and grammatical errors. And then the other thing that we tend to see a lot of is a lot of young officers put "refer to the above information" instead of just writing the information. So these are some things that make your report ineffective. And so these are things that you would have to kind of work on, right? The kind of cornerstone of good report writing is your ability to organize your report. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples at the end of this. If you're going to write a report, you're going to kind of plan in advance. You might even make an outline. If any of you have taken an English course or what have you, sometimes the instructor has you, hey, create an outline first before you actually write your essay. Police report writing sometimes isn't any different, where you may want to put some headings and then fill in under the headings, or write a little outline and then fill it in. Okay, so headings is a really big deal. Listing your facts in chronological order. We learned that in our other lecture. That's really an important thing as well. And this is very generic. I'm going to show you kind of an updated one, but your outline or your headings for your report might be your initial response to the call, what you saw when you got there, the condition of the scene. Did you take pictures? Was there evidence? Are there witness statements or victim statements? And is there a suspect statement? And I'm going to show you an actual kind of heading group that I want you to use. When you structure your narrative, okay, again, chronological order by having a kind of an opening paragraph. The next paragraph might have what the victim or the witness said. Next, you're going to write down what you did. And then your final paragraph is going to be your disposition. So again, I'll show you some examples. We've already looked at some report forms, so we don't have to spend a lot of time on this, and I'll do another quick little video you can look at as it relates to all the boxes. Some characteristics of good reports, in addition to the well-structured narrative: an effective report exhibits other characteristics which generally fall into two areas: content, or what is said, and form, meaning how it is written. So a good report has both content and form. Okay, it needs to be factual, because the basic purpose of any report or investigation, etc., is to record the facts. I think we already know that. And I'll give you an example of a fact. Okay, the man has a bulge in his black leather jacket pocket. That's a fact. An inference is something that's drawn from a fact. So the inference, if you saw this, a bulge in somebody's black leather jacket pocket, it could be a bunch of different things, but if you're a police officer, sometimes the inference is, hey, you know what? That bulge in his pocket means he's probably carrying a gun. So what you want to do is you want to state the facts. You don't want to state the inferences, if that kind of makes any sense, especially on the investigative side. You want to be accurate. So again, spelling, correct names, correct addresses, correct date of birth. If you don't know something, the spelling of somebody's name or whatever, ask them to spell it for you, or ask them for their ID so you can take it right off of their identification. Don't assume things, okay? So make sure that you spell things and document everything accurately. Be objective. You've seen that reports, have to be factual. However, to include only factual statements in a report and still not be objective. So you want to be fair, non-opinionated. You want to be impartial, and that makes an overall good report. Make sure your information is complete. Just having it in your own head or writing it down in your notebook and not putting it in your report doesn't really help anyone. Remember, the common things for report writing would be kind of right here: who, what, when, where, and it can be how or why and how. It really doesn't make a difference, but you want to be able to answer all of these questions on the investigative side, and you want to be concise without leaving out important information. We talked about wordiness. Car was blue in color. We're just going to say the car is blue. Some more examples of wordy phrases. So to kind of make things, shorter, things that I tend to see that people write, they say things like made a note of the fact, or they say square in shape. Kind of like blue in color, square in shape. It's square. It's either square or rectangle or whatever. In the amount of, despite the fact, for purposes of determining. These are all kind of wordy phrases that could be made shorter. Does it mean that you could never use them? That's not really what it means, but just understand that you want to keep your report as concise as possible. Okay? So a good report is clear and only has one interpretation, meaning that two people should be able to read the report and come up with the same picture in their mind and the understanding of events. That's how a really good report would look. You want it to be grammatically and mechanically correct, meaning capitalization, punctuation, etc. Again, we have spell check now, which kind of helps us, but remember, spell check isn't always perfect, right? Mistakes in spelling, punctuation, capitalization really kind of cause problems later on down the road. And I put in a couple of charts in this particular lecture talking about how people kind of tend to be over wordy, where you could do, maintain surveillance over, you could just put watched. So these are just ideas. You don't have to use every single idea, etc., that I have here, but I wanted to kind of show you some differences where you could make words a little bit easier to understand. So I put in a couple of these charts. Remember, from start to finish, when you talk about your reports, and we're just about where we're going to look at one, short paragraphs. Remember to talk in the first person, use the active voice, know who your audience is, and these are good characteristics of effective reports. I'm going to kind of go through. We talked about first person in the last lecture. Use the first person when you refer to yourself, and you can use I, me, my, we, us, etc. I responded to the call is writing in first person, which contrasts with this officer responded to the call, which is third person. So you can see the difference between those two. Okay. Same thing here when you look at active and passive voice. I wrote the report versus the report was written by me. So you can see how this just sounds a little bit better. This is more grammatically correct. Does it mean that you can't write it like this? Nah, you could, but you could. I hope you can kind of see the difference between the two. All right, we talked about, I'm not going to go through that. All right. So we've already seen what cars can do. All right, so in evaluating your report, again, make sure you proofread it. Check your spelling, your punctuation, your capitalization, your your grammar, make sure that it's audience focused, etc. So I didn't want to spend too much time on